Shemuel Perek. So let's take a brief moment to recap what we've seen so far. We saw this wonderful progress of Shemuel Hanavi dealing with the people in a religious way, which then transforms into a political way of political warfare and political success. Once they're following Hashem, we see Shemuel the Navi leading the people, playing a role largely unseen in Am Yisrael since the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Hazal definitely pick up on that role. But there was something that we kind of saw that we said, there's something a little bit missing. And firstly, that was the Aron. The Aron is not, there's no focus of the Aron. And secondly, we have this emphasis on Shemuel. He's going around to the people, which is wonderful and great, but okay, he is where he is. He returns to a place called Harama, Kisham Beto. And how is this situation going to continue? He needs to be everywhere in order for it to continue. And Shemuel, that's where we're going to pick up on Perek. And it seems to be we have a nice solution, or Shemuel had a nice solution. Vahi kasher zaken Shemuel. Vayasim banav shofetim leYisrael. So we have a mini, very interesting, a mini, I don't know what we'll call it. I can't call it a monarchy, right? But a mini leadership succession in which the leader appoints his children in his position. So he was Shofet at Israel. He appoints his children as Shoftim over Israel. He's getting old, right? Zakasha, Zakin Shemuel. Okay, so let them take over. So it's interesting. We have a transfer of power from father to son. But we don't call it a melucha. It's more of the best way to think about it, it's a public service position. And therefore, he's giving his children over the responsibility of serving the public. And then we see what are the names? Pasuk Be, very nice. V'hi Shem Beno HaBechor Yoel, V'Shem Mishnehu Aviyah, the second child, Aviyah. Shoftim Biv'er Sha'ba. And here we have to pause for a second, because I'm sure we're all familiar enough with a map of Israel to know that Be'er Sheva is very different than the locations that Shemuel was operating in, right? I think last time, right, we saw Bet El, Gilgal, Mitzpah, Beshav, Shafat Yisrael, Kol HaMekomot HaEle, and we actually said, I think it was Isaac pointed out, that these places are pretty much located in a specific area, in the central Israel area. And all of a sudden, we have Shemuel's children, the Shoftim in Be'er Sheva, which is all the way in the south of Israel. It's essentially the southern border of Israel, right? Whenever the Navi wants to refer to the borders of Israel, so we use the words Vidan Vad Be'er Sheva. So Be'er Sheva all the way in the south. If anyone ever went to Israel, when you're going down to the Dead Sea, Be'er Sheva is past where you're going for the Dead Sea, so it's really quite south. And the question, what are they possibly doing there? Meaning, not only is it south, but it's so out of place because there's nothing around it. It's bordered by Midbar Yehuda. So we have to ask the questions. Wait a minute. He wants to appoint his sons as Shoftim over Yisrael. His sons are sitting in the city of Be'er Sheva. How is this supposed to work? Well, what does that mean? So even before we get to Pasuk Gimel, we have to ask the question of what does that mean? Why are they sitting in Be'er Sheva? Already we kind of get the sense that the father's famous dedication to the people in which he's traveling is not being replicated by the children. Already we get that sense. But not only that, we have in Pasuk Gimel, Velo halichu banav bidrachav. Yatu acharei habasa, vayikhu shohad, vayatu mishpat. One of the perhaps most unexpected pisukim that we'll see. Okay, Shemuel is the product of Hannah and Elkanah. He grows up in the Mikdash where Hofni and Phinehas failed to follow the ways of their father Eli HaKohen. And all of a sudden you're telling me that his children are doing something similar. Almost like Shemuel is in Eli's shoes. They don't follow his ways. And as opposed to Hofni and Phinehas' corruption, which is specific to the Mikdash, here their corruption is specific to Mishpat, which was what Shemuel did. Vayatu acharei habatza, vayikhu shohad, vayatu mishpat. They're inclined after money, they're taking bribes, they're tilting the justice of the case. It's how do we get here? Wait a minute. Out of all the people to have a child go wrong, two children, just like Eli's two children, right? It's Shemuel who grew up in the same spot, but not only that, fine, okay, fine. He could have, whatever, it wasn't his fault, we could say. But yet, what's more troubling is the fact that then, what is Shemuel doing? Appointing them as leaders over Am Yisrael. How could that be? Does he know? Does he not know? Unclear. And we'll find out soon in a second, maybe, but at least at this stage, unclear. If he knows, why does he not rebuking them? The fact that the in Be'er Sheva should be a warning sign to Shmuel that the people are more interested in themselves than in the sake of the nation, to the father's famous, dedication. What's happening here? So we have something fascinating. We have 3 Pisukim that I'm going to read that kind of are so shocking from a different regard that they often make us lose focus on what's happening here. Right now, I will mention, though, before we continue, Hazal have an interesting thing on this pasuk. And they say, what does it mean they went after money, they accepted bribes, they tilted justice? They explain, listen, it's not really that they were actively accepting bribes. Kol omed, the children of Shemuel, hatu eno ela tu'eh, that's a mistake, but rather that they were sitting in Be'er Sheva and making Am Yisrael come to them in order to increase the fees for their court, as opposed to coming to the people and being in such an inconvenient location. Now, I'm not sure, really, if there's a very large gap between what Hazal is saying and what the text actually says. Meaning, they're definitely not interested in the people. They're definitely interested in their own operations. You can't lead Am Yisrael from Be'er Sheva. I mean, this much should be obvious. The Radak, and many of the commentaries suggest, okay, that's what Hazal say, and that could be a problem as well. But there's definitely this aspect I would keep it in mind that point that they didn't sin, that Hazal are mentioning, is within a multitude of statements. Kol omer Reuven hata, kol omer David hata, and then Gemara Masechet Shabbat said by the same Amorah, who's saying all those statements, and therefore, it could reflect a certain approach. And it's interesting, they're trying to be Melamed Zechut and Shmuel, but definitely it stands so odd. I mean, we can't argue, Lo halechu banav v'drachav, and your Shmuel, how are you appointing them as Shoftim over Israel? How are you not, especially coming from Eli's story? So look what happens. Pasuk Daled. ויתקבצו כל זקני ישראל, ויבואו אל שמואל הנמata. So all of Ziknei Yisrael gather and they say, we need to address this situation. They go to Shemuel, which tells you the prestige Shemuel had. He's nearly a king. And what I'm going to do for our purposes, I'm going to read the first half of Pasuk Hey. And then we're not going to read the second half for a little bit. in order so that we can continue with this thread of the storyline. ויאמרו אליו, הנה אתה זקנת, ובניך לא הלכו בדרכיך. Shemuel, you're old. Your children are not following in your ways. It's not working. Okay, fine, very nice. Okay, it's not working. Maybe the conclusion of what they need to do is a problem. Fine, Shemuel and God might not be too happy. Okay, that's a separate story that we'll talk about a little bit later. But what happens? Where's this whole thread go? What happens to it? Watch what happens to it. Later on, in Perek Yud Bet, they're re-inaugurating Shaul as a king. And Shaul brings all the people, Shemuel brings all the people, and he gives an introduction. And he says as follows. And Pasuk Aleph. So now jumping to Perek Yud Bet, he says, "Vayom Shemuel kol Yisrael." He gathered all of Am Yisrael. Hinei shemati lekol lechem l'chol asher amartem li v'amlich alechem melech. I appointed you king. I appointed you Shaul. He goes and look at Pasuk Bet, one of the most confusing Pasukim that we have. Ve'eta hinei hamelech mitalech nefdechem. You have your king in front of you, and he's a kanti lasavti. I'm old. I'm retired. Uvanai hinam. But my sons are with you. Vanai hinam itechem. Vani hithalachdi lifnechem b'ne'urai ad hayom hazeh. And I've been with you since my youth till this day, and therefore hineni anuvi, testify against me Neged Adonai v'neged Mishiho, in front of Hashem, in front of his king. Et shor mi lakachti, b'hamor mi lakachti, v'et mi ashakti, v'et mi ratzoti, u'miyad mi lakachti chofer, v'ani me'ainai bo, v'ashiv lachem. Did I commit any act of corruption whatsoever? Did I ever take a donkey ride I wasn't supposed to take? Did I ever take an extra payment I wasn't supposed to take? Did I ever oppress anybody? Did I ever accept a bribe? Did I any time accepted a payment in order to turn a blind eye? Tell me now. And they all say, no, you didn't, Shemuel, you're clean. And it becomes a famous idea of Shemuel's honesty to the people. We're befuddled. Why are we befuddled? Because Shemuel, in the statement in which he's saying, listen, I want to make sure that we're clear between me and you, and then he might have other purposes why he's saying this in Perek Yud Bet, which we'll get to when we learn Perek Yud Bet. He says the words, "Uvanai hinam itechem." My sons are with you. Shemuel, you want to talk about justice and how clean you are, and you're doubling down and mentioning that your children are here to support Am Yisrael. The children of Am Yisrael rejected because they already told you, Banecha lo halechu b'dachecha, and it's clear Perek Yud Bet is coming after Perek Yud. So Shemuel already heard of the news. And not only do you not rebuke your children, not only do you not take any such action whatsoever, you double down, and in a speech talking about your clean hands, you actually make your point to mention them as leaders of the people. So there's two approaches here. Perhaps the more intuitive approach, the simple approach, the easy way out is to say, yeah, he was blind to the sins of his children, almost in the same vein that Eli was. But I think this is something. It doesn't make sense within the context of Perek Yud Bet. It doesn't make sense. He clearly views them as people who are suitable for leadership, even though Banecha lo halechu b'drachecha.
Rabbi, isn't what you just said like even more condemning the fact that he saw this in Bet Eli? I mean, that's how he came to power himself.
Right. So that's why I'm saying this. I think it's so impossible because of that. I just think it's impossible. I can't accept that explanation. This is the life he lived. This was his whole story. And now you're telling me he's literally doing the same thing? Doesn't make sense. But keep in mind, he was the one who had to give Eli the prophecy that he's going to die because of the sons of his sins.
Exactly. And he was there and he was waiting on him.
Right.
He saw it with his own eyes.
Right. So therefore, I think that's what I'm saying. I think it's just impossible, even though I said it's one of the approaches. I think it's just impossible to accept it. I don't think we can accept it, knowing what we know about this man, where he comes from, and the fact that he's in the midst of a speech of talking about his clean hands, and he's mentioning them. That doesn't make sense. What do we do? And therefore, I think what the point the text is trying to make is they're not perfect, and that definitely we have to accept. They're not Shemuel. They're in Be'er Sheva. They're in the wrong place. They might not have the perfect calibration of judgment, but it doesn't seem to be that these people are running a mafia scheme, meaning we have to put what they're doing in perspective. What do I mean to say? We're not talking about, they're not only because I saw his name today in the thing, so it's a good example. They're not running a scheme like Sheldon Silver, you know what I mean? Running the nation, just taking kickbacks and the whole thing, only because he might get pardoned. I don't know if he did. Saw his name today, right? That's not what's happening here. Because then it'll make sense. Okay, what is the bribe that they took? Maybe they wouldn't recuse themselves from a judgment in which they, somebody they ate by or something like that. I think much more not okay. I'm not saying it's okay, but much less nefarious, much more gray area as opposed to the Russian mafia of their times. I think it's always in perspective. And yes, the Torah. The Navi can come and say when he's comparing them to the father Shemuel, okay, they're not the father, but are these guys like terrible people who are walking epic disasters on the level of Hofni or Finhas? No, I don't think we could understand it that way. It's just otherwise incredulous, and that's why notice what the people tell Shemuel. Shemuel, they're not you. And Shemuel, okay, they're not me. They're decent. They're good enough. They'll get the job done. That's what it seems to be. But however, there is something here that probably like the bigger theme, which I think is definitely true, was Hazal do this with Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu's probably greatest act of leadership. When he tells Hashem, the moment he finds out he's going to die, Yifkod Hashem Elohei Ruchot L'chol Basar Isha Aida. To appoint somebody to lead the people. Okay, fine, I'm dying. Okay, lead the people. And he says, Elohei Haruchot, Hashem, you're the God of knowing people's spirits, and therefore you could say who's suitable to lead the people or not. Right? One of the greatest pisukim, the greatest acts of Moshe Rabbeinu, we need a leader. Hazal do something fascinating. They do this. They say Moshe saw that Aharon's children, or Elazar, took over after Aharon. And Moshe was hoping that his children would be able to take over the leadership of Am Yisrael after he passed. Hazal, what are you talking about? And Moshe tells Hashem, you've called Hashem, you appoint Elohei Ruchot, you know the right guy. Where do you see Moshe Rabbeinu had a self-interest whatsoever? And what's the answer? The answer is, you know how the Midrash knows? Because the Midrash understands that that's human nature. That, there's always this sense of, biologically speaking, we could talk about it almost from a biological standpoint, the desire to have a continuation and the idea of reproduction and having children that are following after us, continuing in our ways, that like almost desire to see our legacy live on through our children. It's only natural. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it, he didn't answer it, but of course he thought about it for a second. That's what Hazal was saying. And you could see even, however, Moshe, he thought about it for a second, but he didn't take action. Whereas Shemuel took Vayasem et Banav Shofetim L'Yisrael, tried to take this action, and it just doesn't work. So why is this significant to us? That Shemuel is trying to appoint his children and it doesn't work. Because again, go to where we left off on Perek Zayin. We were missing something. We were missing the central leadership to bring the Aron, to build the national product of the Beit HaMikdash. Shemuel is going to the people. It's very nice, but he's not a national. He's not taking them and building a nation in the traditional sense of what a king would be doing. Okay, so he tries to appoint this leadership of Shoftim. He tries to appoint his sons. It doesn't work perfectly. Why not? Why doesn't it work perfectly? Because to be a shofet is a qualification that should not be passed down from father to son. What position could be passed down from father to son? The idea of a king. The idea of a king where it's not dependent upon your mental acumen. And it's not dependent upon your spiritual level of righteousness and your desire for money. That's something, yeah, we want to maintain power within a nation, and we could have a successful transfer between father and son. The son is groomed for this role from when he's 5 years old. He's the crown prince and all the wonderful things that go along with it. That could work. But to take this job as a shofet and to try to instill it and try to make your children after you, it doesn't work. So almost, if we're correct in our assessments here, from Perek Zayin, Perek, Shemuel is the greatest guy in the world, but he comes and goes. There's no king. We're not building anything in a permanent sense. So we see these lines. Now let's get to the second half of Pasuk Hey. So the people conclude, listen, Shemuel is not working. Sima lanu melech l'shoftenu kechol hagoyim. The request for a king. Okay. What? They seem to be entitled. We have bad leadership. Okay. And the famous response, to Shemuel's credit, it's not bad in his eyes that they told him his sons are not acceptable. That he could accept. But when they said, Shemuel has problems. He prays to Hashem. What should I do? Is that it? And then Hashem tells him the
Rabbi, what's the time frame from Perek Hey to Perek Yud Bet? Is it a year, 10 years, 2 years?
We'll see. It's not too long. We'll see. It could be a little bit complicated, but let's say for now it's within the year.
Within 1 year.
Yeah, might be 2 years, whatever, something like that.
So there's not enough time to say that between what happened in Perek Hey and then what happens in Perek Yud Bet, maybe Shemuel spoke to his kids, maybe they did teshuvah, something okay, to give him a little leeway.
The problem is it's not mentioned. You're right, hypothetically, but it's not mentioned. So you would think if it's significant, the text would mention. I don't know. It's very odd. Shemuel never speaks to his kids about it, but then he doubles down on that line. It's fascinating. It's very interesting. So that's why I think we just have to assume whatever they were doing was on a very small, like almost, scale. Okay.
Rabbi.
So, yeah.
Did Shemuel put them in Beersheba, or they went there?
No.
Maybe he put them there. Right. Maybe he put them there because he knew they were being bad.
No. So notice if you look at Pesukim Aleph and Bet, I actually entertained this idea, but I don't think you could say that because it should say they were in Be'er Sheva and Pasuk Aleph. And instead it says it very specifically in Pasuk Bet. Shemuel appointed them as judges, but they were the ones who decided to be Shoftim and Be'er Sheva. That's what it sounds like. I can't. Also, I think that's literally they're not following your ways. They're out of touch. They're not around. Okay, so Shemuel's not happy. The text says when they said again, read it to his credit. Not about his children. he was able to put that aside. But the fact that they want a king l'shoftenu, is that verb significant? Melech l'shoftenu? I don't know. We'll come back to that in a minute.
So, but why are we reading that he's still appointing his sons as shofatim at that point? Isn't he saying that you asked for a king and my sons are one of you? They're not.
Are you asking,
so,
about Perek Yud Bet?
Yeah. So isn't he
No,
saying
because
that my sons are one of you? They're not. They're no longer higher than you.
No, because look what he says. He says in Pasuk Bet, here's the king, Hinei HaMelech, Ubanai Hinami Techem, and my sons are also here. Right? I got old, and my sons are with you, meaning is implying that they're still in some form of leadership role, right? Like corresponding to the king. If they're no longer part of anything, I don't think he would need to say it. Saying, here's the king and my children, and I want,
I'm reading it like he's humbling himself. He's saying, I've stepped away, I gave you a king, and even my sons are equal to you.
Interesting. I'm not sure it works, but I'll tell you what, we'll revisit that approach when we get up to Perek Yud Bet. Okay? Right, we'll see from the context, maybe we'll be able to see better. Okay, we'll keep it in mind. So Shemuel says, he's not happy. Why? Maybe because of the word of Shoftenu, maybe because of the request of a king, unclear. And in the famous Pasuk in Pasuk Zayin, Vayomer Adonai el Shemuel, Shema b'kol ha'am l'chol asher yomeru elecha. Listen to whatever they say. Hilo otecha ma'asu. They didn't reject you. Hioti ma'asu mimeluch alehim. They're rejecting me from being king over them. If Hashem is agreeing with Shemuel that they're not rejecting Shemuel, they're rejecting Hashem, it's even worse. So why agree? Right? The Pasuk seems to be internally contradictory. That's number one. But number two is it seems to be Hashem is also upset. Right? And Hashem tells him Pasuk Het, ככל המעשים אשר עשו מיום העלותי אותם ממצרים ועד היום הזה, ויעזבוני ויעבדו אלוהים אחרים, כן הם העושים גם לך. Hashem says, they're doing the same thing to you they've done to me. Don't worry. They rejected me. I took them out of Egypt. I took care of them, and they rejected me. They worshipped Avodah. I said, okay, they're doing the same thing. They're rejecting you. Don't feel too upset. It's okay. We're in the same boat, Shemuel, me and you. So what? Hashem is agreeing with Shemuel, and they should be upset. Is this implying we should be upset that they're rejecting the kids of Shemuel as the children of Shemuel as leaders? Well, what's happening? What is God saying here? Okay. How do we understand this? Especially, obviously, let's throw in the famous question. This is an idea in the Torah. When they ask us to be king, the people are going to ask Hashem. Whatever Hashem says, the people are going to ask, they're going to have a king, and we're going to appoint a king. So there's a couple of interesting approaches here. And in order to really understand, we have to take a look at the parasha in which Am Yisrael or Hashem talks about requesting a king. In parasha Shoftim, no, it's in the right spot, right here. Okay. Perek Yud Zayin, starting from Pasuk Yud Daled. Now, you should know, by the way, let's read we'll read the first two Pesukim and then we'll introduce the Mahlukat in the Gemara, but I'm not sure the Mahlukat in the Gemara is relevant. Hi tavo la'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach, v'nishta v'yashavta ba, v'amata asima alai melech kechol hagoyim asher svivotai. Okay, you're going to come to the land, you're going to sit in the land, say, okay, now it's time for a king to take it to the next stage. And says Hashem, okay, give yourself a king. God will choose him. He has to be Jewish. Okay, fine. And Hashem should choose. Okay, very good. So this is what the Jewish people are doing. They're coming, Hashem had Hashem Okecha. They're coming to Shemuel. He's the Navi. Shemuel, choose a king for us. Very good. Sima alai melech. That's the words. The same words that they're asking. Yeah, I'll open it in a new tab so we could see that it's the same idea that they're asking for. Right? They want a king. It's the same. Okay, this is what the Torah said. They want a king. Okay, very good. Okay, it's true. We have a mahloket. Right? They say Siba lanu melech kechol hagoyim. Here we have Sima alai melech kechol hagoyim. Same thing. Literally the same word. So I don't know why I did that. So okay, we have a mahloket in the Gemara. Is it a mitzvah to appoint a king, or is it what we call it a shoot? You're allowed to appoint a king. You don't need to. One of the suggestions of one of the commentators that it's comments, okay, Hashem can't tell you have to appoint a king, but it's subject to the political conditions of the time. So he made it okay, if that's what the type of leadership you want, go ahead. He's giving you permission. He's not mandating it. Okay, fine, very good. Either way, it sounds like a king is an acceptable concept. What happens? So there's an easy answer, and then there's a harder answer. The easy answer goes like this. Note the context here. The Torah, in the Torah's context, was talking about mishpat. And we have a mishpat being led by the Kohanim, the Leviim. I'm using my finger to point, and you can't see where I'm pointing to. And Pasuk Chet, Pasuk Tet, Pasuk Yud Aleph, Yud Bet, Yud Gimel, are talking about the laws of the Shofet. And Pasuk Yudalad, when it says Asima alai melech kechol hagoyim, well, kechol hagoyim, to go to war. Okay, you want to go to war, whatever else a king does to build the nation. Okay, very nice. But your ship Shofet is going to be Hashem or whatever, the Sanhedrin, based on the laws of the Torah. Here they added a word. They said, Ata siva lanu melech leshoftenu. And that's what bothered Shemuel when they said, Tana lanu melech leshoftenu. And the context is, Zaken Shemuel, he made his banav shoftim. And they're shoftim, and they're judging mishpat. And therefore, there's a problem here. Okay, you don't like Shemuel's children who are coming from mishpat, but mishpat is not the role of the king. And therefore, Shemuel is angry that they're asking for a king to be in a role that the king is not meant to be in from the Torah. The king is supposed to be a shofet. Is not supposed to be a shofet. It's supposed to be shofet regardless of the institution of a king. And therefore, the people are asking for the wrong thing. Why do I say it's the easy answer? Because it's kind of right there in the text. The question is this a sufficient enough answer? Meaning we would have to read Pasuk Zayin when Hashem is telling Shemuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me, because meaning you're judging in my name, and therefore by rejecting you, they're rejecting me. They don't want divine justice anymore, they want a king's justice. Problem is, and by the way, it works. Later, Mishpat HaMelech, the judging of the king. What's the problem? The problem is, it doesn't seem to bear out.
The problem is that people didn't say that.
No, okay, fine. You say, but they said the word L'shoftenu. You say,
okay, but they didn't. Where is Hashem? I mean, pardon me for asking, but where is he coming with the idea that they're speaking against Hashem?
Right,
they seem to be speaking against, look, Shemuel, you're old, and your sons are unqualified. We need somebody else.
So meaning, and then you would have to make this claim. No, but that's something else is on a melech. That's what you'd have to do, right? But I agree with you, Teddy. I think there's a sense here that there's something missing. There's something. It's almost not explicit enough. Are we really replacing a Sanhedrin? Are we replacing a court system? There's interesting relationships between the Melech and Mishpat throughout the book, For instance, we have Vahi David Oseh Mishpat Ustachka L'chol Amo, so definitely his involves his Mishpat. Later on, Yirmiyahu and David, towards the end of Malchut Beit David, will say the words, Beit David Dinu Laboker Mishpat, the corrupt Mishpat of Ahav with Kedem Navot is what seals his fate. Okay, it could be. I'm not saying no.
Maybe it's that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no. What, Isaac?
No, I was going to suggest that maybe it's, when you look at this, I guess, in the context of also Sefer Shoftim, right? It's that the people are really seeking continuity in leadership, good or bad, because Shoftim are just very episodic. You don't know where they're coming from, right? When you look at all of Sefer Shoftim and even up to Shemuel, right? It's like they come from all different places, all over Israel, right? And it's like every few years, someone arises and, you have a good leader, you have a good shofet, whatever, for some period of time. But then that person dies and then there's nobody, then there's a void, right? There's nothing. And then, because there's a leadership void, because there's no continuity, so the people fall into whatever, and then they get taken over, and then it starts a whole cycle again. And I think that people are just, it's not.
Okay.
It's, that they're done with these episodic.
But the shofets were only were regionals.
Yeah, but not just regional, right? But and then they only popped up every few years. Also, it's like even if the kings are bad leaders, fine. At least I'll have some continuity in representation and defense, right? I have something. But here I got nothing. And then they see on the horizon, right? Shmuel's sons are bad. Oh God, we're gonna go through this again. It's like there's no Shmuel, you want to tell us that there's continuity by you putting your children in charge. What am I getting from them?
Okay, so you're touching on
following up on what Isaac's saying, even more so, the parallels here to what happened with the Miraglim, it's almost the same story playing out again. Why is Hashem agreeing to something that he knows has a bad ending, in the sense?
Okay.
Asking for something, he puts himself into the middle of it and says, okay, go ahead anyway. It's wait a minute, how did you get to this?
Okay, so
it goes back to that book you told us to read last year about whether Hashem, I forgot the name, in his image, where Hashem listens to Bnei Yisrael. What is he listening to them for?
Okay, so that was somewhere, right? But I think that's perhaps the best point, the best rejection of that approach. You can't tell me if they're asking to replace God's laws that Hashem is going to agree. It doesn't work. Good, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to answer that question too, but I'm going to start from Isaac's point, right? Notice these words. Hashem doesn't say they rejected me from judging them. They rejected me mimaloch alehim. And Isaac's hitting on a point here that's very significant, but I'm going to use the words of Shemuel to highlight the point. In Perek Yud Bet, and this is how I think we have to understand it, Shemuel throws them a zing. He throws them a zing in Pasuk Yud Bet. He says, listen, guys, I don't know what your issue is. He goes, Atay yatzivu, v'shafeta etchem lifnei Adonai, et kol sitkot Adonai asher asay techem v'et avotechem. I want to bring you to judgment in front of God. I want to, I'm going to be God's lawyer. I'm filing a grievance against you, right? What did God do? Hey, well, I don't want to read it now, but you were in trouble. Hashem took you out of Egypt. You forgot, and then you had Sisera come and attack you. And Pasuk Yud, you cried out to Hashem, and no problem. Hashem sent this people to save you. And in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayishlach Hashem Yeruba'al Beit Bedan Yiftach Veit Shemuel Vayasel Etchem V'Yadav V'Chem Yisaviv V'Teshu Betach. What did you do? When you had enemies, what did you do? You cried out to God. God came and saved you. Look what he says in Pasuk Bet. V'tir'u ki nahash melech b'nei Amon ba'alechem v'tomeru li lo ki melech himloch aleinu. Adonai Elohechem Malkechem. Whoa. Shemuel is adding a whole new picture, a whole new context to the request of a king. What is Shemuel telling us? You guys are asking for a king, nothing to do with my children. But you were getting attacked. So you wanted a king. What does that mean? Okay. And here I think is the biggest difference. We keep on saying, and Isaac's saying, the king can build something, and the king is not a temporary position, whereas everybody else is, and it kind of dies in this kind of a leadership struggle. I think there's something far more significant. When the king disappears, when the shofet disappears, what disappears with him? The army. There's no army. And you'll see this proven in Perek later on. There's no army. The king has an army. So what are they thinking? If we have a national army, we don't need to worry about this business of getting attacked. We sinned, and then Hashem sending us enemies, and now we need to do teshuvah in order to save ourselves. Look, we have an enemy coming now. What are we going to do? And so we need a king. We don't want to deal with these things. You don't want to deal with the spiritual world. Give me a king. Give me a set army. Give me a thing. And even when the king dies, it goes to his son. The army remains loyal to the king. That's how it works. Shemuel doesn't have an army. He's a one-man traveling band. There's no army involved. And therefore, how are they rejecting Hashem? They're rejecting Hashem by saying, we want to have normal means of protection. We don't want to have a spiritual means of protection. They're rejecting me, Shemuel. They're not rejecting you. It's not just about the shofet. They're rejecting me, but we're going to give it to them. Now, why do I think this reading works? Because look what the Torah tells us about a king in the Torah. What 3 things a king is not allowed to have? Lo yarbeh susim, and lo yarbeh nashim, v'cheses v'zahav lo yarbeh me'od. He's not allowed to have a lot of horses. He's not allowed to have a lot of women. He's not allowed to have a lot of gold and silver. Why? Because we don't want our kings to be too powerful. Why don't we want the Jewish king to be too powerful? Well, the continuation, we get to the positive. When he's sitting on his chair, he's going to be reading the Torah. And why is he reading the Torah? Because we need him to remember that Hashem is king. And when he's not too powerful, he remembers that Hashem is king. And what are they asking for? What type of shofet? They're not asking for a shofet in the sense of Shemuel was a shofet of judging the people. They're asking for a shofet of shefer shoftim, of having somebody leading the people into war. And they say, we want a permanent shofet, lead us into war. We want a king. And therefore, there's a sense of rejection of God. Who's aware that the institution of a king could be very dangerous? Who's aware? God in the Torah. God understands that the institution of a king could be very dangerous, could lead the people to trust in the might of the king, to trust in the politics, the women, probably because of foreign alliances, right? To have a lot of gold and silver, to have a lot of horses for the chariots, for the army. The Torah understands this. Okay, there's still room for a king if you want the king for the right reasons. And not only is there room for a king, there's a mitzvah, according to most opinions, to have a king. And there's a need for a king, because there's a need for continuity. There's a need to build a national thing. There's a need to bring the Adon towards Yerushalayim. There's a necessity for all these things. But it all depends upon the vantage point through which you want to use a king. And Hashem is saying, listen, they're asking for the wrong reasons. They're doing the wrong thing. But listen to them anyway, because we're going to make it work anyway. And that's what Hashem and Shemuel are going to do. We'll see this more explicit in Perek Yud Bet as well. We'll see. We're going to make it work. And that's what Shemuel wants them at the end of Perek Yud Bet. But I think these Perakim speak to the nature of the potential. There could be a right concept, but for the wrong reason. And a king is really a potential problem in that sense, because it's such a powerful idea that it could easily be misused. And Am Yisrael are misusing it now. They're not asking for the right reasons. They're nervous they have different agendas than what Hashem wants to accomplish with the king. and Hashem is going to try to work around them. They're asking for the wrong reasons, but give it to them. This is where they are. We're going to give it to them, and we're going to make it work the right way. So what does Hashem do? So now we actually have to finish the Perek. So let's read this, and then you can analyze the idea. But let me very quickly read the rest of the Perek. Listen to what they tell you. Tell them the mishpat of the king that he's going to rule over them. Okay. So Shemuel goes, so you want to know the role of the king? Okay, no problem. Okay. You know what the king is going to do? Look at the first thing, the first couple of things he says. He's going to take your sons. He's going to put them in the chariots. He's going to put them as horse riders. He's going to put them as riders before the chariots for his kavod, but military ideas. He's going to take them to put them as officers in the army. Why? Because there was no army. There were no chariots. There were no horses before. Because there was no king before. Now there is. And then the army needs to be fed, so we have to plow, and to harvest. We need to support. We need now not only that, so we need to have people working to support the soldiers who need to be fed. They need to feed them, and then they need to make kalei milchama. They have to make the tools of war. So all of a sudden, this army has a whole thing. Now, what does that involve? Okay, the army needs cooks. No problem. You gimel. And your daughters are going to be the cooks employed by the king in order to feed the army. So all of a sudden, you see the first three Pesukim, what is he talking about? He's talking about creation of a army. Okay, you want an army, no problem, but you're going to lose out. You're going to lose your children, and not only that, he's going to take your land, and he's going to take your land to give to his avadav, to give to his warriors, to give to people, and he's all of a sudden you're going to create a new culture in which you have to support the military. And וזעקתם ביום ההוא לפני מחלקיכם אשר בחרתם לכם ולא יענה אדוני אתכם ביום ההוא. You're going to cry out before Hashem, and God is not going to answer you from the oppression that the king is going to do in order to pay his taxes, in order to maintain his army, right? Which is all what it comes down to. If you look at the budget of the United States of America and the amount we spend on defense spending as part of the budget, it's quite disturbing. I mean, we're talking about $1 trillion, $1.9 trillion packages. Go see how much these planes, these jet fighter planes cost, each one of them. So, go figure. Different ball game. So the people say no. No, we want a king. Now listen to their words. You ready? Oh, no. We're willing to pay the price to have an army. We want the king to go to fight for us. So they admit this is they finally reveal what they were really thinking of. Go, I'm going to find you a king, and that's where we'll pick up that story later on. But meaning, this idea of that they're really asking for a king, for an army, for war purposes, comes out explicit in their words in Pasuk Kav. It comes out explicit in Shemuel's words when he's describing what the king is going to do in order to create the army, and everything he's going to take. And obviously, that word yikach appears 4 times. Yikach, 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 yikach. So it's true. Shemuel's sons were going back to Pasuk Gimel Shohad, but the king is going to take far more in order to create this army and this military state that you're asking for. So it's really a fascinating development and discussion about what's really happening when they're asking for a king. And I think the answer is there in the text. You just got to read a little. And I think Hashem is saying like this: they're asking for the wrong reasons, but we can still make it work. And that's why it becomes imperative to choose the right guy. But we'll see more of that theme going on later on. But I think to take away that the request for a king is not necessarily bad if done for the right reasons. Definitely, there could be a lot wrong with the king. I think is already embedded within Parashat Shoftim. I was about to say Sefer Shoftim, Parashat Shoftim, Perek Yud Zayin of Sefer Devarim. Okay, so let's pause here for tonight, and hopefully we will be able to continue next week.